Hello, I'm Mark Armini, and today we're going to talk about Gene Wolfe's There Are Doors. I always kind of fancied this cover right here where she's turning into the statue, and then this is the Tor or orb cover right there. So, this particular work by Wolfe is interesting because its hero truly does seem to be a very unexceptional person, right? He's not at all like Severian or Latra, one of those very competent kind of maybe high mimesis characters, right? This is low mimetic. Now, it still doesn't necessarily fall into the realm of realism, though, right? At least not obviously. And so I want to talk about third person narration in Wolfe because he still is able to do some very tricky things with it that we might not normally be prepared to look for with that third person kind of omniscient narrative. And the reason that that works for him is that he doesn't take the omniscient point of view for the narrative voice. He sticks to the point of view character. So even though there are things that can happen outside the purview of, let's say, Cassiopeia or Cassie in Evil Guest, or outside Mr. Green in There Are Doors, still he's sticking to a particular point of view, and we are in a position to find things once again through illusion, but especially through structural repetitions. I've heard people, kind of comment that, oh, without the bias that we can implicitly kind of understand about a first person narrator, there's no way to get to the bottom of third person. I find that not to be the case at all, as we'll discuss in There Are Doors here. So, real quickly, right, in this particular story, we have Mr. Green, who is probably the most unexceptional and forgettable protagonist that Wolfe has ever devised. And yet, somehow, right, he is able to seem special because in this particular world, C1, as he finds himself occasionally, right, that's kind of parallel to our own, he is the only man who won't die after they mate. Now, there is so much irony in this when you understand the actual kind of build-up and the actual condition of Mr. Green in this, because every man, right, in this particular story really is doomed to a particular fate. And so I think that Wolfe, through the repetition of certain themes and motifs dealing with Attis, right, the lover of the goddess, more or less, really is reinvoking that doomed lover. And Mr. Green, unfortunately, is also doomed at the end. And so, real quickly, I want to talk about the surface plot, and then we'll go into what I think is really going on here. So, the surface plot, he finds himself, in and out of mental institutions, and sometimes they say that he's an alcoholic, right? He's a salesman, and he's had a very bad relationship with his mother. But the book opens where he is in the room with someone who he believes to be the goddess, right? Laura Masterman, or Lara, right, as he calls her, and he asks her that question: "Do you believe in love?" And she says, "Yes, and I hate it because it brings doom to the men that she loves in this particular case." And then this happens on March 14th, which is the week before kind of the celebration of Attis, during which he dies, in the classical world. So it's a very significant time period. And so most of the novel is going to be set in either spring or winter. There doesn't seem to be a lot of seasons that are passing here. And so the seasons in this particular book really are indicative of that same kind of fertility cycle that Attis also kind of engenders, where he's kind of emasculated for the goddess. And so with There Are Doors, right, we have a situation where Mr. Green is in these institutions like United, and he thinks he's in an alternate reality, C1, where, Amelia Earhart is, and where he meets these other characters from the institution, the antagonist of the novel, North, right? Eddie Walsh, who's a boxing promoter, Joe Joseph, who is a prize fighter, and a couple other characters there. But if you actually look at some of the allusions and references, these characters are drawn from what Green might have actually experienced when he was a child and his mom would like make him read the comics or watch TV. So, for example, Eddie Walsh, the fight manager, and Joe Joseph, and then that guy WF who talks with them as well. right? They are all drawn from the Joe Palooka comic strip to some degree. And so even the manager, right, is named Walsh. Now, he wasn't named Eddie, but his creator, Ham Edward Fisher, was. So a lot of the things that Green is experiencing in this world are drawn directly from our world and entertainment. And there's a couple other really telling things that let us know that his quest for the goddess is ultimately in his head there. So Laura Masterman is a real woman, right? He has been going to the mental health clinic down there and he's kind of fallen for her and started seeing her, but he suppressed these memories at the start of the novel. And so what we get in this is a scene where he's trying to recreate her, but he's also idealized her in his mind. And so when he's finally committed once again, he has kind of this psychotic break, right? And how do we know this? Green is the one who has a problem with his mother, right? He was raised by a single mother. He really didn't have a father figure in his life. And yet, right, when he is in the institution, which is called United, um, he meets some of these other masculine characters, including kind of the fight manager, Eddie Walsh, right, who's training Joe Joseph there. And he is told that he needs to find Walsh in a particular room. He has to spread some news there and deliver the information to him. So he's going down there, and when he shows up at that room, the bad guy North is in there, right? It's like, did he take a wrong turn? And the first thing that North says is "Mama," right? That's what North actually says there. And when we see his psychiatric profile later, we learn that North is, a schizophrenic who also is classified as a self-harmer. And this is going to be very important because, okay, he was looking for Walsh. He found North, and then North kind of takes over the book, right? North tries to become the boxing promoter, and so there's this fight scene at the very end where Joe Joseph is fighting Sailor Sawyer, I believe, is the name of his opponent for the championship there. And there's all this dragon imagery that's associated with it. And here North makes his power play, right, to really try and take over. And this is where we're going to go kind of out of order in this. This is where he dies, right? He has the two guns. And then somehow in that scene, when he's confronted by Walsh and by Green, right, they each wind up with a gun. And somehow Green is able to twist the gun around in North's hand and he pulls the trigger. And I want to talk about that scene because it's the pivotal scene in this particular book, right? So in the Tor version, this is on page 297. And I'm going to skip a few sections here. Then Green held the gun. He twisted it up and back. It fired. Its flash half blinded him, and the sound of the shot was deafening. He heard his own nose break, a terrible sound. Something had invaded his head and was working destruction there. He gasped for breath, drew in blood, and spat it out. More blood was streaming down his face. Also, way earlier in the book, when Green escapes the mental institution, he happens to escape it with North. But also, when they read the paper, it says 3 people escaped. Oh, Walsh, the boxing promoter, also escaped. All 3 of them escape at the same time. All of them wind up with a weapon in their hand. And at this moment where North is killed, because Green kind of turns the gun on him, he realizes something has penetrated his own head there. And earlier he had actually punched North in the nose. And so this also, they kind of trade nose injuries here, right? So there's a lot of other things that indicate that Green's quest for the goddess is all in his head, right? The thing that some of the people died of over there, Malacapita, right? Why they had to get rid of the dog, bad head, more or less. That's his problem. He actually is severely damaged, and those disparate portions of his personality are trying to vie to create a real masculine figure who has presence, who has power, who can be a champion rather than just some schmuck nobody. And so this particular story is actually almost entirely realism. And you can see the moments where he has his psychotic breaks. They're really neat. Actually, there's one where he has Laura Masterman in the restaurant and he's talking to her. And she's like, "What's your problem, right?" And then all of a sudden, it's like everything changes. And suddenly she's the goddess. And she says, "Yes, you found me. How did you get that picture of me? I'm the storm that men will willingly go to their death seeking out, that adventure, right? That they'll beat themselves to death. And this is exactly what Green is doing in his quest for a woman, right? And now the interesting thing about this is that Wolfe syncretizes so many things, like the triple goddess, right? The maiden, mother, crone. There are different versions of the goddess, more or less, in C1 that he is able to kind of interact with and meet. So there's the older one, that Martha Foster, who kind of buys the desk and then won't sell it to him at first, and then she realizes, oh, you know what, I need to give it to him. He gets the little doll there that kind of reminds him of Laura Tina, right? That doll there. How is she powered? She's powered by tears, of course, because he's depressed, right? That depression that he has brings her to life again. So when he's crying on her, right, she comes to life, because that's all in his head too. And there's so many things that Wolfe does to play with this structurally. I didn't find this book particularly difficult to figure out because of those structural motifs that are repeated. He even plays with the Brothers Grimm, where the names, would have been like Jacob, Joseph. Well, he switches out William there, so William and Joseph become interchangeable. Then you learn that the name of Clam and Herr K, right, from Kafka's book there that show up in this particular story. His name is also Joseph, and he shares some of the hobbies, right, that the fighter does. Like they both grow flowers and things like that. So all of this is actually in Green's head, and they're all just a part, right? They're a part of him. So when he checks into that like hotel with North, and they're hiding out there in kind of that winter environment, he uses the name Pine, of course, which refers to Attis, that emasculated god who is going to die under the pine tree. And then North checks in under the name Campbell. And of course, Campbell is famous for his work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and the monomyth. And Green actually is that kind of figure, right? The hero with a thousand faces. But he's not much of a hero. And so in this book, every man who mates in this alternate world dies. In seeking to mate, right, Green is kind of dooming himself to that. Now, there's something else very interesting here. In the alternate world, there are some words that are just a little bit similar. Like aspirin becomes aspinin, that R becomes an N. And so the name of the place that he's going to seek the goddess is said differently, right? It's Maria. It kind of resonates with the C as well. And then at another point, it's Mania. And so this changes after he turns that gun around there and damages himself. And that's the moment where he can't really go back. So the sirens at the end of the book, really, whether he's dying or dead or he's permanently in a coma, he can't go back, right? He's stuck there in his head forever, or in that spiritual world overwood, right, where nothing can survive. And so just like in previous videos, I'm going to go ahead and include the link right here down below, so you can look up some of those references. It'll be good for a month as well. So really, though, there's a couple things going forward that I wanted to talk about There Are Doors with. I think, right, that it's pretty clear exactly what's going on in every single scene, right? Like the piano, where they kind of have this grand thing where the three people who are missing parts become a vast host of people. It's all the imagery that's associated with the damaged Green, creating all these characters in his head to become a whole man again. So every scene, when you look at it, really resonates with that, and it's so unified that I think once you've noticed some of those patterns, it's hard to ignore them, right? Like when he opens the locked door in his room at United when he's first is checked into that mental hospital, he sees like the desk that he's going to try so hard to get, and that Martha Foster will refuse to kind of sell back to him at a certain point. It has that green lining, and it has that letter in there that's so important. And so these patterns and motifs that are repeated, it's pretty clear, I think, and hopefully you'll agree with me after you've read the write-up in particular, that all this is in his head, and this is actually a work of realism for Wolfe, right? But that the third person, non-omniscient narrator sticks so closely to Green that it never leaves his deluded point of view. And so the ziggurat, right, in Strange Travelers also works this way as well. It stays so close to the main character, who also has some severe mental problems. But the motifs that are repeated in that are the snow. So when the snow clouds his vision, you know that he's hallucinating something, right? So in Wolf, even the third person is not impenetrable. Now, having said that, right, I know this is not the most exciting video that I can put up here. My voice is a little bit under the weather, but I wanted to get ready to do Evil Guest. And I mean, gosh, right? The thing about Evil Guest is that I had to read that thing, like, I'm not even kidding, 10 times in a row to start to see the structural patterns that were so obvious to me in There Are Doors. Wolfe is doing the same thing where the scenes reflect on one another. So, for example, in There Are Doors, when Eddie Walsh, right, and North and Green all escape at the same time, and then at the end, they all happen to have the gun in their hand at the same time, right? That means something. We need to put those things together, right? When an injury to North appears on Green as well, we need to understand, right, how that actually works with all those references to Campbell and the monomyth and all of this stuff, right? We really need to see that it can be applied and that we can make sense of all those references and allusions to television and to comic books and to artists who either went crazy or killed themselves, which is one of the motifs that I spend a lot more time on in the write-up there. So Evil Guest, though, really took it to another level. Wolfe just continually gets trickier and trickier and trickier as his writing progresses. And so I don't find There Are Doors to be particularly hard to spot those details. How confident am I in this reading? I mean, 100%, honestly, right? You can guess scenes that are going to happen and how they're going to happen once you understand the illusions, right? And so There Are Doors, right? Once I understood it on like I read it, I think, 3 times in a row, back to back. And on the third read, I really did understand exactly why almost everything that was occurring in the book was occurring. And that's, I think, when you know, right? When all those small details start to congeal. The one thing, right? The one thing that I'm still a little bit up in the air about is the significance of the desk that he sells. Whether that was actually originally his mother's, right? Or if there actually is some other love story that's associated with that desk that he's so obsessed with it has the green vise there. But otherwise, right, all those little leitmotifs and set pieces, they really do make a lot of sense, and they're very unified, right, extremely unified. So even though I've only touched on it lightly today, please go ahead and check out that article that I've linked down there. And next time, we're going to delve into what I think is the most difficult piece that I feel I've actually mostly solved that Wolfe has written in An Evil Guest. It needed such intuition, right? And so much extrapolation before everything kind of clicked that I don't know how honestly he could have expected anyone to get it. I really don't. And that's the problem with late Wolfe. There Are Doors doesn't have that problem, right? You read it a couple times, you think about the patterns, it clicks into place. You just have to understand some things are metaphorical, some things are literal. But his late fiction, you really need to make some wild, wild leaps in order to make sense of all the small details. And that's why I'm still not done with my huge project, right? Land Across, I cannot reconcile the dreams with the main narrative in a way that satisfies me. So really, right, more than There Are Doors, I wanted to talk about how Wolfe uses narrative point of view and how even his third person narrator is reliable in a way that is not necessarily on the surface, right? Everything is true, but not necessarily in the way that you originally think. Sometimes these delusions are presented as reality, but they make sense of other things, right, when you understand them as delusions. So it's not as if we're saying, oh no, this didn't happen. It's just that it's an internal condition that affects Green here in his quest for love and his quest to be exceptional when he is a completely unexceptional person. And it is so sad, right, that that quest for love leads him to self-destruction, ultimately, whether he's aware of it or not. And so this really is one of those sad, sad books that Wolfe wrote. Wizard Knight also has that level of pathos when you see to the bottom layer there. So Green, I think, is one of his more tragic figures because he has imagined the one world where he would be somebody important. And still, that's not enough to save him. Thank you for listening. I know this was kind of a somber one. We'll be more upbeat next time. Have a good one.